All right, let's dive into this explainer. Today we're going to unpack a massive landmark case that beautifully highlights where student rights and the civil code collide. We're looking at the Supreme Court of the Philippines decision in Christine Rhea M. Regino versus Pangasinan Colleges of Science and Technology, or PCST. Now, before we really get into the weeds, I want you to ask yourself, what actually happens when the massive power dynamic between a big university and a single vulnerable student becomes abusive? When that educational relationship just entirely breaks down? How does the law step in to level the playing field? Well, this is the definitive case you need to know to answer those exact questions.
Right out of the gate, the Supreme Court lays down a foundational legal doctrine. Your enrollment is a binding reciprocal contract. A reciprocal contract basically means it's a two-way street. Both sides give and both sides take. You pay your tuition, you agree to follow the school's rulebook, and in return, the school is legally bound to give you the specific education you paid for. The court firmly established that because this agreement gets locked in the exact second you enroll, a school cannot just unilaterally shift the goalposts. They can't vary the terms midway through the semester, and they definitely can't suddenly demand arbitrary fees that weren't clearly specified the day you signed up.
So, here's our roadmap for this digest. First, title and legal doctrine. Second, facts of the case. Third, issues before the court. Fourth, the Supreme Court ruling. And fifth, obligation and student rights.
Let's kick things off with Part 1, Title and Legal Doctrine.
Under the Civil Code, a contract requires a true meeting of the minds. The terms of the school-student contract are defined at the exact moment of its inception. The school outlines the itemized fees, the academic rules, the expectations, and the student agrees by enrolling and paying up. Because of the mutuality of contracts, both parties are completely bound by those agreed-upon terms. Think about what would happen in the real world if contracts weren't mutual. Imagine buying a car, and right as you go to pick it up, the dealership suddenly demands an extra $1,000 for a stereo system you never asked for before they hand over the keys. That would be chaos. Apply the education. This principle ensures that once a semester starts, the financial and academic deal is essentially set in stone.
Moving right along to Part 2, the facts of the case.
Let's trace Christine Regino's incredible journey, because the facts here are honestly kind of wild. She was a first-year computer science student from a very poor family, and she was only able to attend college thanks to the financial support of her relatives. In February 2002, her school held a fundraising campaign called the Rave Party and Dance Revolution. Every single student was required to pay for 2 tickets at 100 pesos each just to fund the construction of tennis and volleyball courts. And it gets worse. Teachers were literally bribing students with 50 extra test points if they bought the tickets. Regina was financially strapped, and crucially, her religious beliefs strictly prohibited her from attending dance parties, so naturally, she refused. As a direct penalty for not buying a 100 peso dance ticket, her logic and statistics teachers, Rochelle Gamarot and Alyssa Baladad, publicly ejected her from the classroom and barred her from taking her final exams. By April, a completely humiliated and delayed Regino filed a complaint for damages as a pauper litigant.
But Regino immediately hit a massive procedural brick wall. The trial court entirely dismissed her case based on this concept called the exhaustion of administrative remedies. Now, why does this rule even exist? Generally, it's there to prevent regular courts from getting completely clogged up with minor, highly technical disputes that an administrative agency could easily handle. In this instance, the lower court claimed Regino should have complained to the Commission on Higher Education, or CHED, instead of going straight to court. They argued that because the Education Act put CHED in charge of supervising tertiary schools, this was strictly an internal administrative matter. Based on that logic, the trial court threw her case out entirely for lack of cause of action. Which brings us to Part 3. The issues before the court. First up, we have the procedural issue. Was the trial court actually correct in saying this was strictly an administrative matter for CHED? Should Regino have filed her grievance there first, or was she legally right to bypass them and go straight to the regular trial courts? Second, we have the substantive issue. Does forcing a student to buy a dance ticket mid-semester legally constitute a wrong that warrants actual damages? Did her complaint against the school and her teachers successfully state a cause of action based on the civil code?
Let's see how they untangled this in Part 4, the Supreme Court ruling.
The Supreme Court systematically dismantled the trial court's dismissal, brilliantly showing exactly why that administrative exhaustion rule completely failed to apply here.
The court pointed out that the doctrine has absolutely no bearing when the administrative body lacks the competence to act on the specific relief requested. Regino wasn't just asking for a simple policy change, she was seeking civil damages. She wanted moral, nominal, and exemplary damages for her intense public humiliation and her delayed education. Administrative agencies like CHED are not courts of law. They have zero power to hand out financial damages. If CHED had just given the school an administrative slap on the wrist, Regino wouldn't have been made whole. This was a purely legal issue, calling for the interpretation of the civil code, placing it squarely within the jurisdiction of regular courts.
Reversing the lower court, the Supreme Court confirmed Regino perfectly stated a cause of action. She met the 3 essential elements we all know from Oblicon. Let's apply these directly to her situation. First, she clearly possessed a legal right to take her final exams because she paid her tuition and fulfilled her standard academic requirements. Second, the school had a strict correlative obligation to allow her to take those exams under the terms of the reciprocal contract. And third, the teacher's egregious act of publicly ejecting her from the classroom was a clear, undeniable breach of that right, which caused her direct injury and delayed her studies by a full academic year.
Now, during the proceedings, the school attempted a pretty fascinating defense. They tried to hide behind the concept of academic freedom, arguing they had the inherent right to enforce administrative policies however they saw fit. But think about how absurd that defense really is in this context. Academic freedom gives schools the independence to determine who may teach, what is taught, and how it is taught. Using that noble concept as a shield to mandate a revenue-raising dance revolution ticket in the middle of a semester, that is a massive logical leap. The court firmly shot this down. They ruled that academic freedom is absolutely not a free pass to discriminate, nor is it an excuse to back out of contractual obligations. Once a school accepts a student, those initial standards must be meticulously observed.
Let's tie it all together in Part 5, Obliquenon and Student Rights. This specific article right here is the absolute anchor of the Supreme Court's decision. Under Article 1159 of the Civil Code, once a valid contract is perfected, it literally has the force of law between the parties. In essence, the contract acts as a mini-constitution governing that specific relationship. When Regino enrolled, that mini-constitution was ratified. The terms were set at that exact moment. The school's attempt to force a brand new, mid-semester fee for a rave party under the severe threat of failing students blatantly violated the good faith compliance required by this article. It was an unjust, unilateral modification of a firmly established reciprocal agreement. Furthermore, the court made a really profound, high-level observation here that's incredibly important. Normally, we think of torts, like negligence in a car accident, as something that happens between complete strangers, right? Contracts, on the other hand, deal with parties who know each other and have pre-existing agreements. But the Supreme Court ruled that liability for a tort can actually exist entirely within a contract. Regino didn't just sue for a simple breach of contract, she sued for tortious conduct based on human relations. The breach, literally kicking her out of her finals, was done in such a publicly humiliating manner that it constituted a tort. She was essentially punished in front of her peers for her poverty and her religious practices. The court found these actions triggered Article 19 regarding the abuse of rights, Article 21 for acts contrary to morals, and Article 26 for vexing or humiliating a person on account of their lowly station in life or religious beliefs. I'm going to leave you with this final, crucial thought to chew on. This case unequivocally proves that the student-school relationship is not just some ordinary run-of-the-mill commercial transaction. It's imbued with immense public interest. Do institutions sometimes forget their primary educational mandate and begin to act like entities prioritizing revenue through coercion? For sure. But when they do, the law steps in as the ultimate equalizer. The Oblicon framework isn't just some abstract theory you find in textbooks. As we saw with Christine Regino, it is a very real, very powerful legal shield that guarantees protections against institutional overreach and defends the vulnerable.